This video has been created for my podcast, Mark My Words. Simon has kindly come on the show today and we've had a really good discussion about his time as an MP. We've talked all the way through landlord tax. We've talked about his business career, immigration, why we've got such huge numbers, how this relates to economics, housing, and then into what's about to happen potentially next year with a new government, Corbyn, Starmer and Blair, and a little bit of history around that, and what's happening with energy strategy in the United Kingdom. So let's dive straight in, and please make sure you like, subscribe and hit the bell. On today's podcast, I've got something a little bit different. We've got Simon Danczuk, who I met just about a week ago. We had a really good chat in central London about various topics. I had a little bit of lunch with Rob, and we thought it would be particularly good to get him on the show because he used to be an MP. And he's got loads and loads of views, lots of in-depth knowledge. So Simon, welcome.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your days as an MP, Simon, what you did before and what made you want to become an MP?
Yeah, I'd wanted to be an MP from the age of about 15 actually. So I got the political bug, as some people do, and then I eventually stood when I was 25 to be a councillor in Blackburn, lost, so I stood again when I was 27, did 8 years as a councillor, but then I developed a business, market research, that's my background, sociology, social research, political research, set up an agency of my own, stepped back from the council to focus on business. Quite unusual for a Labour MP actually to have a business background. But when I got into my mid-40s, I was running this agency that I'd set up, and I thought if I don't try to be an MP at this age, then I'm going to miss the opportunity. So around 2005, 2006, I started looking for a parliamentary seat to fight, and I chose Rochdale, and the Labour Party members there chose me as their candidate, and I fought it in 2010. So that was the lead up to it.
So you were a Labour Party councillor, were you all the way through?
Yeah.
And what sort of really galvanised your motivation for doing that? You know, was it purely altruistic? You want to help people? What?
Yeah, and that is what I enjoyed both as an MP and as a councillor.
Yeah.
I got a lot of satisfaction from helping solve people's problems or being able to come up with solutions and trying to get, civil servants or council officials to do what they should do correctly for people. And so that's a particular aspect of it that I enjoyed. I'm from a very, very poor family, so ideologically I had some inclination to want to improve the lot of people who've not had it so good, or who've been vulnerable. That's what got me ideologically interested in politics. I'd read loads of George Orwell as a young guy, perhaps oddly, but a bit of an anorak when it came to politics. Never really done sport or football, just done politics. So that was my thing, and it grew on me, and I thought I need to do it. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm bound to talk about landlords, tax, and this constant, probably really, it was before 2016, but it really got going officially, I feel like, in 2016 with George Osborne and Section 24. So the inability to offset all the mortgage interest against the rent, which I think we spoke about, stamp duty going up, for landlords buying properties, but then sort of rafts and rafts of legislation that has continued to be piled on, whether it's right to rent checks, there's Legionella checks, maybe, all the safety testing, the layers of safety testing that have to go on in a rental property, the banning of any sort of letting agency fees, or, that's just a small portion. And now landlords are being hit with the repealing of the Section 21, which means that they can't gain vacant possession of their property unless they're going to sell it, and maybe for some other reasons. There's a clear direction of movement here, and I'm sure some of it is tax, but some of it isn't. Why do you think the government have taken this tack? Because of course, in the end, the only people that can pay for this are the customers, the tenants. as we can see, rents since 2016 around here, they've nearly doubled. So now we've got the evidence, and not just landlords moaning, oh, they would say that the evidence is there. So sort of basic economics, isn't it? You reduce the supply of something, the price goes up. They're not really helping the tenants. Why are they? What's the motivation? I don't really understand.
I suspect what the government are trying to do is sort of respond and react to what some of their own members of parliament are saying to them.
Yeah.
So they've got, and there are instances of this happening in London. I currently rent in London.
Yeah.
I own in Rochdale. And I've been a reluctant landlord as well in times gone by. So I know how difficult it is to get repossession of your own property.
Yeah.
I've experienced that myself.
6 to 9 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in answer to your question, I think the government are reacting to some individual MPs' experiences from their constituents. But the bigger issue here is really immigration. So you've lots more people coming into the country. We had the figures for last year, for 2022. I forgot what it is, something like 400,000 or 500,000 extra people.
I think it was 616,000 net migration. Yeah.
And we might get onto this. I live in Dolphin Square in London. That is heavily populated by Chinese students.
Is it?
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
from our stories, I'd got in my head, it's mainly MPs and people.
Well, it's a real mixture. There's 1,300 properties.
Yeah.
Some are short-term lets. That's some of the strategy for the landlord. Fair enough. Some are being renovated, and a proportion are Chinese students who are presumably very wealthy, because it's not a cheap place to live.
No.
But that inevitably pushes rents up, doesn't it?
Of course.
And so the reason I say it's related to immigration, if you have so many more people coming into the country, then as you've just pointed out, economically, we have fewer properties available.
Yeah.
And we certainly aren't building enough properties. We should at least be building 240,000 properties a year, and we are nowhere near that, perhaps about half. So this is the real situation. The government aren't addressing either immigration. They're allowing too many people to come into the country. So students can bring in family members. There is no reason for that policy at all. I think about 80,000 of the 600,000 that you mentioned were family members.
Yeah.
If they're coming to study, they don't need to bring, and they were advised not to allow that to happen. So this is having a result on rental values. It's making it harder for people to rent. And so you have constituents, like you do in Dolphin Square, going to their local Conservative MP and saying, the landlord is treating us like this, they're putting the rents up like that, they're neglecting us in certain ways. And then the MP is making representations to her government, which is saying we need to control private landlords.
Yeah.
And so you can see where it stems from. And by not addressing this over here, immigration, you end up creating a problem over there.
Yeah.
And so the government are tinkering around with the private rented sector. The reality is it's a really important and a growing an increasingly important part of the mix in terms of, because council housing has practically died a death. We still have social housing. People still like to buy and own, but rental is a more crucial part of the mix than it ever has been, and we should encourage that.
And is getting smaller now.
Yes.
It is reducing.
Yeah.
Because of course there's a couple of things going on here. Obviously, yes, there's migration. I was going to come on to that, which is a big part of this. But in addition to that, it's the mix between how many are owning and how many are renting. Because of course landlords are being driven out. Now, obviously Michael Gove would say, well, all right, if there's one less landlord, that property doesn't disappear, somebody buys it, and a first-time buyer might have it. And there's not a bad argument for that. But it doesn't encourage a flexible and dynamic labour sort of labour force. Having a decaying rental sector. Yes, I know they want to the government want more tax out of it, and maybe this is one of the solutions. And yes, I can understand lots, MPs are coming to them on an individual basis saying, well, I've got this issue or whatever. But as a strategy, it doesn't seem to make any sense at all that rents have doubled since 2016, because they've reduced the rental supply of properties. Where is the strategy?
Well, I think there is often no strategy. And I think, I mean, in terms of the really bigger picture, in terms of politics, I think that's what we've been lacking, isn't it? We've continually had a change of Prime Minister, and we lack a vision as a country.
Yeah.
And so at the macroeconomic and political level, we really don't have a vision for where we should be going and what we should be doing. And we have had that in the past, where government has worked more cohesively across departments, whether it's the Treasury, the Community Local Government the Community Local Government Department, Business Department, more working in unison to try and achieve an outcome and a better goal for the greater good of the country, but we just haven't had that. And I'm not being partisan about this. I'm not in any political party now, but we haven't had that for quite a considerable time. And so one aspect of government doesn't know what the other's doing, and what the repercussions are for a particular strategy over here doesn't suit what's going on over there.
But why haven't we had that? And why, I know we're in this sort of, 4 or 5 year election cycle, the Fixed Term Parliament Act, and you can see MPs and the government are looking towards the next election all the time. But there was an election every 4 or 5 years, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Before that act. Why is this gone? Why is the strategy disappeared? And why is there not somebody smart, in an economic sense, running the show? I thought that's what Rishi was. But isn't he just doing more of the same? This spin, nonsense.
Yeah, well, it is about political leadership. It's just like in business. It's always comes down to leadership. In this instance, political leadership, and we could analyse each individual Prime Minister. Boris, for all his talents, he has faults as well, to say the least. But some of that is around, not being able to direct very well. Not being able to create a strong vision.
No.
It could deal with the day-to-day. He's very popular on the doorstep and all the rest of it, but not in terms of giving a vision. And then we had Liz Truss, which is probably, there's a blip in the whole of it. She probably wasn't really given a chance. The markets went against her very quickly. And I'd never really been a Rishi Sunak fan, but I do think he's something of a technocrat. He keeps his head. He is now in a position where he's forging forward, trying to ignore the Boris show and get on with running the government. And you might finally get some stronger leadership from Rishi. I do think he has some vision. He's set out some priorities for the next 12 months, reducing inflation, some targets which you would do in business. So that's to be welcomed, growing the economy, paying off the national debt. So there is some vision there. But whether he gets a chance to prove himself between now and the general election is a different matter. So you need consistency.
It takes time, doesn't it?
It takes time. Look at Margaret Thatcher.
It's like an oil tanker.
Absolutely.
And the results don't show. You put the hard yards in, first 4 years, maybe you get the results 6, 7, 8 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for Blair had many years at it, and he has his faults just like all of us. But he did create some cohesion within government. And don't forget, we particularly see this, and it's an important point, is that we have a civil service, the blob as it's now called, that are really not signed up for the elected government's agenda. So you look at the Home Office.
It doesn't seem that way, does it?
No, they're certainly not.
Well, this is going to be my next question.
They're leaking left, right and centre. So whoever's Home Secretary, if that Home Secretary is not on the left, and they won't be because it's a Conservative government, that's what we elected, then they leak against them. Suella Braverman and her points, driving, speeding points, that's come from civil servants. It's not come from anywhere else.
Well, this is what I thought. I mean, I was going to say the same about Priti Patel. I got the feeling that those two women actually did want to do something about immigration and stop the small boats. But why is it that the person in government whose responsibility is and would appear to have the power to do something about this, and also look like they actually wanted to do something about it, Why is it they don't seem to be able to?
It's because the civil service rallies against them. There's no doubt about that. I had coffee earlier this week with somebody who had been a senior advisor to David Cameron, and I asked these very questions. And, he said perhaps the solution is the American model, which is where when the president comes in or the new party takes over, then they bring in their own people to run things. Yeah. And I think we certainly have to do something different in this country.
Something's got to happen, hasn't it? I suppose it is good having these people who are continually there and not on the 4 or 5 year cycle for the reasons we've just mentioned. But I don't know, maybe it's the more junior people stay. Yeah. They know how to run the ship, and then the senior management gets changed or something. It's just bizarre, isn't it? Because she, now Suella Braverman's been there a while. It's just the same thing as before, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't seem to be able to deal with these mandarins.
No, absolutely. And we've talked about leadership over the last few years: Boris, Truss, Sunak. I actually don't think it will be any better under Keir Starmer. I haven't decided how I will vote yet, but I don't get a strong sense that he will provide a strong vision that would suit my kind of politics. So I've always been traditional Labour, tough on illegal immigration, tough on benefit cheats, and that we're not going to get that from North London Labour, which is what Keir Starmer is, it's what Ed Miliband was, it's what Jeremy Corbyn was. So I'm concerned about a Labour government and how effective they will be.
I'm just going to pause there for a second. Don't go away, because we've got lots more gossip about government, gas and energy prices, where they're likely to go. But before I do, if you want to get involved in the property market, then click on the link below that will let you download a free report. Within this report, you're going to get over 40 ways to get into the property market to help you build your portfolio to get that passive income stream you've been looking for. I promised you some gossip. I promised you a talk about energy. So let's get back into it. So you touched on sort of Blair earlier. So you've got Corbyn, Blair, then Corbyn, and very probably Starmer shortly. Where are you on that spectrum? Are you a Corbynite?
It's certainly not a Corbynite. The Financial Times described me as Corbyn's fiercest internal critic when I was in the Labour Party. I'm proud to say I like to think I played a part in ensuring that neither Ed Miliband nor Jeremy Corbyn became Prime Minister. And so I was never overly partisan. I think that politicians should do what they think is best for the country, not what is best for their party, which is an exceptional view. It's not the most common view held. And I didn't think Ed Miliband was right. David was very good, I have to say. I was a supporter of David Miliband. But Ed wasn't right to be Prime Minister. Corbyn certainly wasn't right to be Prime Minister, and I said so.
I mean, that would have been a disaster. I mean, we were all... I suppose I was worried. I've learned not to get too worried, because often they say one thing and do another. But with Corbyn, I was pretty sure that... they weren't even going to give him the sort of nuclear button, were they?
It would have been disastrous.
They weren't going to. He wasn't going to be in Cobra meetings. I mean, it was just a bizarre scenario.
Yeah.
So Blair, we've spoken, previously. Good communicator.
Very good communicator. They come by spasmodically, don't they? Margaret Thatcher was a great communicator. Tony Blair, Nigel Farage is a great communicator. Yeah, he is. Boris is very relatable. I won't say he's a great communicator. He's not a great stand-up speaker. Yeah. He's not a very good performer in the House of Commons, in the chamber. But he does a good after-dinner speech and that. But he can relate to people. Even though he's from a relatively posh background, he can relate to people much better than Keir Starmer can. Yeah, of course. But the big ones, Blair, Farage, really have the ability to communicate and understand. It's not just about being able to speak to people. Yeah. It's about being able to interpret what people want and think, and want the direction of the country to go in. Yeah, and then package up their responses as a response to what those wants and needs are, which is very powerful. Yeah,
Yeah, when I was growing up, I used to watch Blair and Bill Clinton speaking, and I still think those two.
Yeah, Clinton is
just on another level.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, to see George Bush come later, it's just like, what's happened here? And then you realise that they're not all that good.
No, but different leaders have different attributes as well.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean,
Very true.
Gordon Brown was a phenomenal economist, you could argue.
Yeah.
And, not many give him credit for helping sort out the world recession that we talked about. But he
did a lot there, didn't he?
A significant part in it. He wasn't very good as Prime Minister, was he? But
I don't think he was a communicator, was he?
Exactly.
And
a lack of emotional intelligence.
That didn't work, did it?
It didn't when he met Gillian Duffy on the election trail in Rochdale when I was trying to get elected.
Yeah.
So
sat in the back of the car and made some comments.
That's right. The bigoted woman. Yeah. He put me with the bigoted woman.
Yes.
So,
I do remember that.
Yeah.
We don't really know what Starmer's going to do. I mean, he's been very closed book, hasn't he? Trying to appeal to, all sort of churches. He thinks his strategy is to not put too much out there. He'll take the view that the Conservatives are losing it, and so that's helping him. He just needs to do nothing.
Yeah, absolutely,
and not trip up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he's beginning to put out some policies. I mean, the idea of stopping any new oil and gas development in the North Sea. Very controversial, not a policy I support. I mean, it is madness.
Complete and utter madness to me. Yeah.
As Rishi Sunak said to him at Prime Minister's Questions, this is, he said, your predecessor, Ed Miliband, had a policy, British jobs for British people.
Yeah.
This is British jobs for Russian people.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just transferred, we're going to carry on buying gas.
Got to. It's not going to stop, is it?
Exactly.
What are we going to do?
So what is that about? So when he has come up with policies,
surely a lack of understanding.
Yes,
for what the final result's going to be,
and listening too much to Ed Miliband, which I think is dangerous. This guy lost the 2015 general election for Labour. I think Keir is too close to Ed, listening too much. The other policy
now
he's listening to him now.
Right,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think he's here. He's 28 billion they're committing to borrowing to fund a green jobs plan. That's a substantial amount of money. Rachel Reeves, you can see now, trying to roar back from that policy, clearly an Ed Miliband policy.
Yeah.
So whilst he's trying to stay quiet, not say too much on policy, when Keir does say something on policy, particularly around the environment, because it's Ed Miliband's brief, is coming a cropper, actually.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how it develops.
And you wouldn't necessarily expect that, because one of my bugbears is you look at ministers and they're sort of, they're not really trained for their portfolio, and they're there. I mean, housing, I don't know how many we've had in the last sort of decade, but or even 5 years. It's been a huge amount. But I saw Rachel Reeves and I thought, oh, she's an economist, so maybe that's a good start. But if she's giving Starmer these ideas, is she a heavyweight?
Oh, she's certainly an heavyweight. She's rallying against Ed Miliband. I mean, this is the internal nature of Labour politics.
Yeah.
So you've got Ed Miliband, very much North London, literally neighbours with Keir.
Yeah.
They're very close. Keir listens to him. Ed's in his office a lot. This is the gossip. This is what I'm giving you some inside gossip here. Rachel, and he's responsible for the environment in the shadow cabinet. So he's bending Keir's ear to all these policies, the Green Deal, the oil and gas stoppage. And Rachel Reeves, I suspect, is rallying against it, saying, we can't afford to go into a general election borrowing £28 billion. This is unrealistic.
Yeah.
So you can see some of the comments. She was recently in the US and interviewed. She was railing back from the 28 billion policy,
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, I wonder how much of this is a response to the US Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually just, a new Green Deal with different clothes on.
Yeah.
Them sort of saying, well, we're going to develop all these new forms of energy, which I'm sure is great and maybe good for the economy in the long run, but it's going to take a long time to get there. And what do you do in between?
Yeah, exactly.
To generate all this power that we need. because nuclear is not going to cut it.
And we should have been doing that years ago.
Well,
I mean, that's a failure of government past, you know, Labour and Conservative.
1 to 2 decades ago, they should have planned all of these because, you know, for all the base load, you know, that's surely, you know, you have that. Yes, over time you reduce the oil and gas, but the wind doesn't blow all the time. You know, you don't clearly here. You don't get sun a lot of the year. I've got friends with huge fields with diesel engines just sitting there, latent, not operating, which they're getting paid for. And they're the effective backstop for all of this green energy. Because you know, if you've got a wind turbine turning, you know, the battery technology doesn't really work. So, you know, in the ground, you've got a huge amount of these coils, which just basically waste all of the energy that's generating if the grid doesn't want it at that moment. It doesn't usually go. It doesn't go into batteries because that technology is not far enough on. So you've got a situation where those only really work when, you know, the grid needs the energy and the wind is blowing, you know, or the sun is shining. So you need these other things like nuclear to create the base load as part of the mix. And again, it just, where's the strategy? Why is surely it's the job of the civil service to look at that and sort of go, this is what we need to do. I'm not getting sacked in 4 or 5 years, probably. So, you know, I need to hold this brief for the next lot and persuade them that this is what's important for the country. And
other countries are better at this. You look at Scandinavia in terms of planning and having a smarter forward strategy. But we've been very poor at some of that, no doubt about it. And then you end up with a war like Ukraine, and all of a sudden we've got an energy crisis.
Well, now we understand it.
Exactly.
We see the effects.
But one thing is for sure, turning the tap off in the North Sea immediately is not the solution. So why he's saying that, Keir Starmer, I do not know.
Well, electricity and gas has tripled. You know, to the consumer, you know, in round terms, maybe it's more like maybe it's 2.5 times, 2 times it's settled at, but it had tripled and it was going up 8 times a year ago. And, you know, that really focused our mind because we're paying a lot of energy bills. This will make it worse. So, it's just bizarre.
I think there's all to play for, though. I think we're a fair way out from a general election. A lot can happen in 12 months' time, actually. So it's one to watch. It's going to be one of the more fascinating ones, I think.
Yes, it will be. It'll be very interesting. Thank you very much, Simon. I appreciate you coming on.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
So that's been Simon Danczuk and Mark Homer. I do hope you've enjoyed this content. Don't forget to comment, like, and hit that bell, and I'll see you on the next video.